Alright boys, so I was just kind of sitting around thinking about doing a video on like Brynhilde or Ilya, doing something along the lines of like, hey, is Summer Brynhilde really that bad? And as I was kind of thinking through doing that video, I was like, man, who is actually the worst servant in FGO? And I'm like, hey, this would be a really fun discussion video to do, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that have different thoughts on who the actual worst servant in the game is. Now, we're going to limit it to just 5 stars for this video, because if we start including like 4, 3, 2, and 1 stars, I think the answer starts to become a little bit more obvious. But I'm like, yeah, who is like the worst 5-star unit in FGO? That could be a really fun topic to do, and so we're going to talk about that in today's video. But before we begin, if you enjoy daily FGO content, make sure you leave a like on the video and you subscribe to the channel for that sweet daily FGO content. Also, if you want to see me play FGO live, I usually do that every weekday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time when I'm not on vacation as I am now. But we should be back to that regular schedule on Wednesday, I believe. But with that being said, I kind of went over here to the Game Press tier list just to get an idea of what people think the worst servants in the game are. Now, Summer Abigail, I actually don't think is the worst 5-star unit in the game. I think this might be a little bit capped, but the reason I think she's held in such disdain is that she does not do buster farming very well, and that is because Summer Abigail is like a debuffing type servant, right? Like, she's got the 50% battery, that's really good, but all of her damage just comes from debuffing people, and you don't really carry that into each node. So her damage, while it can technically be really good if you've got all the debuffs going, in reality, if you're going to use her as a buster AoE person, she's not going to do very well because she's not carrying all of that debuffing damage into every single node. You know, that's why you want servants that give themselves a lot of buffs and can carry damage through nodes 1, 2, and 3 to be very effective farmers. Abigail doesn't do that, but I don't think she's completely useless in that vein, because if you want to bring her to more difficult content, right, she can be kind of good. Again, all the debuffs do allow her to do some pretty decent damage. The terror thing can be pretty good as well, being able to stun the enemy. I get that she doesn't have like actual survivability, and it's not as though Koyenskaya is going to give her any extra survivability, because Koyenskaya's like methodology for taking down nodes is just do a whole lot of damage, right? But I don't think she's the worst servant in the game. I don't know if you can have a 50% battery and do decent damage in more like difficult challenge quest type content and be the worst servant in the game. So I kind of am disregarding Abigail over there. And so now I'm kind of looking at like Iskandar, Sigrid, and Nightingale, and then Arjuna. Like, these are kind of the ones that I'm looking at. Arthur was definitely also one that I was kind of considering, but he at least does have somewhat of a niche, and he's not like, I guess, the worst ever. Like, he can actually do things with his skills. You can do some crits, and you can do, I guess, what some people would call damage if you want to be very nice to him. I don't know how you have a 50% mana burst and you have an NP damage buff on your NP and you still only do like 20k damage. I just don't know how that's actually a thing, but he's at least got like a niche, and hey, he's got a battery, right? That makes him pretty decent. And I can't really see someone like Ruler Artoria being one of the worst servants in the game, because she can actually do some very good crits. Like, she can do some very good damage on her face cards, and her NP is fine enough as is. The shuffle ability is also pretty strong if you know how to use it. And so I can't say that from my experience that she's like one of the worst servants in the game, right? I can't say that. Malnobu, I also can't say is really all that bad, especially after all of her buffs, which I don't know if they're taking those into consideration, because I believe she got one relatively recently on JP, although I might be getting my JP timeline and my NA timelines mixed up, which does tend to happen when you play both versions of the game and they're 2 years apart. Sometimes you forget what buffs are out and which ones are not out yet, but I believe she did get a buff recently, and I don't think Game Press takes that into account, because I think they're mainly an NA website. But so I'm looking at Iskandar, Nightingale, and Arjuna. Now, looking at someone like Arjuna, right, I don't know if I can quite say that he's like all that bad. And okay, this is and this is be lenient, right? When I say that he's not all that bad, I mean all that bad in regards to being the worst servant in the game, because I'm like, okay, like, bro does have like a decent enough battery and does charge his NP every single turn. He does basically have permanent debuff immunity. That's kind of good, and then this can give him like a turn of decent enough damage. So I'm like, Arjuna could clear a way for you, and if he's in more difficult content, I guess it's kind of nice that he has some consistency. He can drop some stars to play around with, that he's also an archer and he has decent natural star weight, and he is immune, so I didn't really have to worry about him getting like stunned or anything. So I'm like, okay, I don't know if Arjuna could really be the worst servant in the game. So I want to kind of take him off the table and then really just look at someone like Iskandar and Nightingale. And I think it does actually come down, in my opinion, to Iskandar being worse, because the only thing I think you can really use Iskandar for is like a nice buffer for the party, because he gives them this attack buff, he gives them this NP damage buff, the crit buff, like all that can be really good. And if you can get to his NP, it can be a nice star bomb because of this, and he has really high hits on his NP over, where is it? There it is. I was like, it's over here. It's got the 8 hits on this. And so that plus the star drop rate on his third skill can be really good in allowing him to bomb a lot of stars. The problem is that, like, bro is not really going to be getting to his NP all that consistently, right? It's not super consistent for Iskandar to just be, like, firing his NP all over the place. And even when he does, you only really get the star bomb once. Like, if these were 3 turns and we smacked, like, a 30% battery or something on this, whole different story. But in that regard, if we're going to be like, oh, well, Iskandar can, like, buff the party at the very least. He's, like, basically like a 5-star version of Alexander, right? People use Alexander as kind of like a pseudo quick buffer because of the quick buff and the attack buff that he offers. He's kind of just like that, but a 5-star version and more general because it's attack and NP and not a specific card buff. But if we're looking at that, then I think Nightingale just does the job a bit better. Like, just giving somebody a free 50% Buster mana burst is really good, especially if you want to consider JP, where she now also gives them Buster crit damage. Plus, her first skill and her NP are actually really useful. Like, I would argue that her NP might actually be more useful than Iskandar just kind of being a one-time star bomb, because this can allow you to just straight up face tank some NPs. Like, if you have an enemy NP coming in, cutting their attack by 50% and then she cuts the NP damage by 50 as well, yeah, like, it's really, really insane. Well, could potentially even be higher if you want to go for higher overcharge levels. If for whatever reason you're using her with, like, Morgan, and Morgan fired her NP first and gave Nightingale the overcharge buff, she could actually do even better than that, right? And so I think she just has a little bit more value over Iskandar, who really isn't doing a lot, right? Because when you consider that, like, yeah, Iskandar can do 1 turn of really good damage when he's got the attack buff up, the NP strength up, and then the 1 turn that he's got this Buster up, he can do some really good damage, but then he kind of just falls off. And so you'd rather probably use somebody like Drake, who has like a similar set of buffs, but also it's a 50% battery, so she could be very useful for Buster farming. I just don't really see a point in having Iskandar, aside from the fact that, like, that he's really cool. Like, if you like Iskandar a lot because you watched Phase Zero like me, then, you know, obviously he's really cool and you'll probably still try to use him. But from, like, a meta perspective, I think he actually might be the worst servant in the game. I can kind of understand if you wanted to say like Sigrid might also be one of the worst servants in the game, because you're looking at them from the perspective that he'd be like the worst AoE and Sigrid would be like the worst single target, but at least Sigrid can do some really nasty crits, right? And the dragon thing he's got going on isn't the worst thing on the planet. Like, this is fine. Like, 100% crit damage, that's pretty nasty. I believe Iskandar's is only 30% over here, right? So it's not quite as good. Yeah, his crits just aren't as nasty. And then at least, you know, you fight dragons relatively often, right? Like, it's not like the most uncommon thing on the planet, so he can do some really good damage. He can be kind of a fine single target. If you really press me on it, I might be able to find someone that I might be worse. I mean, because I was thinking, I was like, do I like him better than Tamamo? And I was like, well, Tamamo did just get like a 30% battery, so she probably is actually just better than Sigrid. And Male is probably, and don't quote me on this because I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but Male might be a better damage mod than Dragon. But again, I don't quote me on that one. I just feel like there's more males than there are dragons, but that might actually be wrong, because now I'm thinking about it, there's dragon enemies too. So I don't know, it might just be the 30% battery that she has over Sigrid. Plus Sigrid, to be fair, also just only gets the 3 hits. If this was 3 turns, whew, boy, it'd be crazy. I mean, they're kind of very tame when they buff him, to be fair. Like, they only gave him 3 turns on this as well. Like, they're not really wanting this guy to be good. But all right, if you kind of held me down and you said, who do you think the worst servant is in the game, I'd probably say Iskandar. But I'd love to hear guys' thoughts in the comments down below. You know, this is one of those ones that I'd kind of like to get a community discussion kind of going, because I don't know, we never really talk about this. We always talk about, like, a new servant comes out and they're nuts to butts broken, or we'll discuss, like, oh, are they like an A tier servant, are they S tier, and maybe, like, you know, I'll be like, oh, this servant's really nuts, and then get a little bit of pushback on how good they are, right? Because maybe the servant is not quite as good as I think they are, but they're still good. But this is like a different perspective. It's like, are they actually that bad, right? Like, is the servant actually really that terrible? And I don't know. I think Iskander is just kind of there at the worst. Like, he's like probably the servant I would rather use the least out of everybody here, because even like Arjuna's got like consistency at the very least. He does have an immediate battery, makes him easier to use. And then as far as like being able to benefit the party, Nightingale does it better. Again, I do think that Abigail having the 50% battery is going to be much more useful, because you at the very least could try to use her as a buster farmer, right? Like, if you really were that desperate and did not have anything else, you could at least push through with her, and you know, be in a lot of pain for doing that. But then also just the debuffs that she's able to do can allow her to do some pretty decent damage, right? Whereas like, you know, Iskandar is only able to do like one turn of good damage, then he falls off because he loses the Buster buff, and then he can no longer do the Star Bomb thing anymore until he gets his skill back. And then even then, it's not like he has a super easy, consistent way of getting to his NP. But that's my opinion. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments down below, and I will catch you guys in the next video, which, by the way, also in the comments, you can let me know if there's any other discussions like this that you would like me to discuss. Again, discussing things about FGO is always my favorite thing to do. It's why I love doing the tier list, and I love videos like this, because I just get to talk about a game that I really enjoy playing. And especially in these down periods, you know, now is the time to kind of have these discussions before June comes around and all the Lost Belt 6 stuff just starts flooding into the game. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.